This is the Parents in Sport podcast. Amazing guests, honest conversations, topics that matter.
Welcome to season 4 of the Parents in Sport podcast. I'm your host, Gordon MacLelland. I'm delighted to be joined today by coach and author Reed Maltbie. Reed, thank you for joining us on the show.
Oh, Gordon, it's so good to see you. I'm excited to talk with you and everybody in your audience.
Yeah, it's great to see you as well. We've obviously known each other for quite a long time, but it's great to finally get you on the podcast to talk today about the power of language and how our conversations and the things that we say can have a huge impact on our sporting children. I know recently you've just written a fantastic new book called The Spartan Mindset, Mastering the Language of Excellence. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the book and also your background and your inspiration for writing it?
Certainly. So my background, I started coaching when I was 16, and it was always a hobby up until mid-20s when I realized I could make a living at it. So I went back. I'd already had a master's in sport performance. So I went back and got a master's in early childhood education. Those 2 degrees really started to shape how I approached creating learning spaces for athletes. And obviously, those 2 degrees lent towards thinking more about how the brain plays a role, that brain-body connection. And so I got really into how we speak to kids, how we interact with them, the cues, the physical and the verbal cues that are happening in our environments when we're coaching them. That led to my TEDx talk in 2015, the power of echoes beyond the game, power of coaches' words, which was really more focused on the emotions that we create in children. So the way we speak to them actually creates an indelible mark in their brains or in their lives going forward. And so what kind of echoes are we creating? From that, I began getting deeper into the concept of how do we speak to children? How are we structuring our sentences? How are we using cueing? Looking at Nick Winkelman's work, and talking about cueing language, and looking over psychologists like Dan Abrams and others talking about how we're creating these game faces. And so I got really into that communication pattern and realized that language is it's the keystone. It unlocks everything for us, but it's also that choke point. And a lot of times the difference between first and second at elite levels comes down to the brain. And usually it comes down to how we're communicating with ourselves or how people around us are communicating with us. And so my son challenged me back in 2015 to write a book because I'm such a word nerd. He said, you need to write a book about all these words that you like to use. Because I became very scripted in how I coached my athletes. I would not just write out the training session and have an understanding of what the learning objectives were and what we were going to work on and cueing points, but also the actual language I would use. Because I thought, if I'm training them in state-dependent learning, if I'm training them a certain way and I'm using certain words during training, I need to use those same words during games because it'll trigger brain processing and bring memories back. And those neural pathways will be paved more firmly if the same words are used from training to games. And so he said, you really need to write about that. So the book, Spartan Mindset, is structured around the concept that in high pressure, high stress situations, there are certain words that people use with themselves and with others that either inhibit peak performance or prohibit peak performance. So they're either peril words and they actually cause us to choke or limit our ability to perform at peak, or there are power words that actually help us perform better because they're triggering those brain processes, or they're relaxing the mind, or they're tapping into those neural pathways, which is where skill is in those neural pathways. And then I added in a few chapters on these, what I call transformational words, which are these words that when used in those moments, not only do they have peak performance opportunities at their power words, but they transform the people in that moment, and they transform the moment. Words like love, using love in the right context, or I love you regardless of whether you make that field goal or not, which is the story I tell in the book for that chapter. It transformed that athlete and it transformed the coach and anybody else who was involved in that moment. And so that's the book. Each chapter is a word or a phrase. And I go into whether it's a good or bad one for performance, and then some science behind it. I start each chapter with a story about the word so you can see it in use. And then I finish with some tips and hints of here's how you can use it more often, or here's how you can start to eliminate it or reframe it, rewire the language in those moments.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating read. No, I was very privileged to get a sneak preview when you were writing it, and it certainly it allowed me to ponder and reflect a lot, I guess, from a coaching and teaching perspective, but also particularly how we interact with our children, because sometimes we just throw statements out there because that's what we do. And actually, I was reading it thinking, yeah, I'm guilty of that. Yeah, I've used that. Is it the most helpful? No. Have I ever even considered that it might not be the most helpful? And it was like, no, I haven't done that either. So I think there's a lot of sort of gold dust in there for us. Now, with sports parenting, it does involve a huge amount of interactions with our children. Now, that could be things that we talk about at home, things perhaps when we're watching the game with our kids. It's obviously the car journey to and from competition. It's perhaps what we say on the sidelines. What are we, as a starting point, what do you think as sports parents we need to think and consider?
So you touched it. The best compliment I've gotten for the book is exactly what you said. Is a lot of people said I've become more intentional. I think a lot more. And if, as you read the book, there are some personal stories in there where I do the same thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've used that phrase with my kids so many times. And so that's the big thing is, as parents, the first place to start is just to become very intentional, very aware of what you're saying and how you're saying things to your children. And then start to link that up, try to align it with the sporting organization and the coaches you work with, because you're partners. You can collaborate and you can work together. And that's from a coach's perspective. Most coaches are thinking, I'm a partner with you as a parent. And my goal is to help raise your child in the game and beyond. And so I want to work together with you, just like educational systems want to work with the parents. And so see if your language can line up, reinforce things that are being worked on within a sporting organization, the values that are discussed, the tactics and techniques. Coaches are getting more sophisticated, especially with organizations like yours, where you're going out and you're teaching coaches to be more communicative with parents and to guide parents and give them opportunities and speaking points. And so as a parent, the first step is using those, align with the sporting organization and with what your child wants to get out of it. Another big one is a lot of times we forget just to ask our children. We really forget the you phrases, to put them at the center of the universe. It's their sporting experience. We had ours. I had mine. I'd love to live vicariously through my kids. My kids did not play soccer, and that was my sport. And so when they got into sports like volleyball, which I never played competitively, I became a passenger in that journey, learning from them. Why did that happen? What was that call in the game? And why did you do X this way? And what does that mean? And explain to me, so they became the teacher and I became the student. And because of that, I asked more questions than I did give answers. And so it became a very powerful conversational experience for my kids. And they were much older. They were in high school, but they led the conversations and it was about them. And I began to understand what mattered to them. And so my language started to center around the things that were most important. My son said the other day, I'm not going to play volleyball competitively past high school. And so I'm playing it for A, B, and C. And so my conversations now center around A, B, and C. Did you have fun? Are you making the connections you want? Are you, asking him questions about his experience? And that's really changed the conversation. So as a parent, if you can align with the organization and the values, and then find out what your child really wants out of the sporting experience, and then your conversations start to center around that, it will completely change the conversations. And more importantly, it'll help guide you in how you can speak to your children more effectively. It deepens your own relationship with them through sport. And then sport becomes that vehicle for a much better relationship.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on so much amazing stuff there. And I think our ability as sports parents to ask the right questions at the right time, those open questions that allow our children to reflect on their experience. They see the world very differently to how we see it. I mean, it's great to ask these questions. I mean, we talk to parents a lot about this. It doesn't mean you let them answer for 10 seconds and then wade in with everything you wanted to say anyway, which is, I guess, a sort of a bit of a practice point as we go. But I think using key words and being more explicit about it, we're doing a lot of work on the building blocks behind performance with parents, how they can view their kids' week based on some of these key life and character traits. And the more you become engrossed in all this, a bit like you found with your coaching and the writing of the book, is that children can only value some of these words if we're really explicit in using them. If we're not talking about them or linking them to something that they're doing well or linking it to something that has meaning for them, then actually they don't see any value, because it's like, and that's the problem perhaps where we do get driven a bit by the did you win, did you score, were you the best player type of question, where then actually what we're saying without even realizing to our kids is that's what we truly value. So we've missed all that amazing, vehicle as we're going through it. And I think that explicit, open question, but that understanding what motivates our kids, because it'll be very different. Every individual will be different, just like every car journey is different. And we've got to know our child. And, you may end up, as you say, with some really strange answers, but you've got to ask strange answers to you, but you've got to ask the question so you can best support them.
Definitely. And so interesting, you bring up the did you win, because that was a big fault of mine in my lifetime. And there are three crucial moments as a parent. Our children mirror us. Our children will model and copy us, and they will become mimics of us. So a lot of times you see proxy bullying or proxy behaviors because parents are saying and doing things in certain situations, and the children pick up on that. And they just, because they trust us and love us so much, they'll carry them forward. So if there's a particular player that you're making fun of, those kids will start to make fun of that player, not because they're malicious, but because they picked up on us saying things. And so there are three crucial spots. It's that game recap. Did you win versus how was the game? What did you think of the game? There's the car journey, when you have that opportunity to say things like, I don't know why coach has you at right fullback. You're not built for that. Or why is Johnny keeper? He's the worst keeper. And those conversations leave the car with them when you say that stuff. And then there's the kitchen counter conversations where you're just randomly having conversations about the sport. And again, the problem is because we've lived it, we've experienced it, we've been there, we have our opinions, and that's great. But the problem is our goal is to help them form their own beliefs and opinions. And so, like you said, it's just changing the language a little bit, asking the opening question instead of did you win, which my son one time asked me if he was a disappointment because he wasn't a great goal scorer and didn't win a lot of games. And it's because every time I saw him, if I wasn't at his game because I was at another one or at his brother's, I would ask, did you score? Did you win? So he thought that's what I valued. And he thought that his value to me was only based on that. It became a very, transactional relationship. And it was devastating to think that my son valued himself based on questions I asked. So we had to switch the question. And the other one, like I said, is a lot of times somebody will say, oh, well, your son's been picking on another player, or your son's been whatever the reason is, minor things. We hear it in classrooms too. And a parent will go, oh, I don't know where they got that. Like, that's horrible. I don't know why. I've never taught my son to speak to somebody or my daughter to speak to somebody like that. What they didn't realize is having those outward thoughts like, why is coach playing Johnny at goalie? He's just horrible. That sticks with the child, and they carry that conversation forward. And so the big one for parent in those situations is to focus on your child and what they can do and align it with the team goals. And if they start that conversation, oh, Johnny's so bad at goalie, say, we're developing, or shift it back to them. Well, how do you think you did in the game though? And what can you do differently in the game to help?
Yeah, and that's so important. I mean, one of the big things that we taught sports parents about is that to help your child fulfill their potential, it is your job as a sports parent to help them get to the top of their ladder. And we know comparison's the thief of joy. We know that kids, I mean, the best bit, and since the last time you and I have spoken, I get to speak to lots of the athletes now as well and ask them the best and worst of coaches, the best and worst of their parents, all the bits, try to get them to understand what their sporting journey looks like. And it is a top 3 answer for the children about when they dislike their parents the most is when mum and dad compare me to another athlete. And we've really got to listen and understand that, because you and I both know that making comparisons, particularly at the younger stages, are actually fruitless tasks, because they're not even really good comparisons, because sport's so messy as we're going on the journey.
Yes. And there's that analogy that's been going around the internet for a few years now about the popcorn. And it's so true. Popcorn pops at different pace. It doesn't all pop at once. And so you got a bag of popcorn, and your kid could be the kernel that pops the very last second when the microwave's getting ready to stop, or your kid could be the kernel that popped the very first. Well, the one that popped very first, if you're comparing your kid to that athlete who at 10 years old is dominant, bigger than everybody else, faster than everybody else, that's setting your child up for so much failure, because that's just an overdevelopment piece. That's an older player, born in a different part of the year, or they're a faster developer. The late bloomers are the ones that, look at Tom Brady. Tom Brady talks about the fact that when he was in high school, his freshman football team, I just saw this the other day, they didn't win a single game, and he wasn't even a starter. So he's sitting on the bench watching his team lose every game, and he couldn't do anything about it. Now he's one of the greatest quarterbacks ever to play in the NFL. But if he judged his career at 14 years old compared to the guy starting in front of him, he wouldn't have gone on. And so he was an example of the piece of popcorn, the kernel that popped late. So yeah, the development process is different for each child, and we as parents have to understand it. And our goal is to keep our child seeking the joy in the sport, keep them focused on their own personal development, like you said, and their ladder. Let them climb their ladder. They're climbing it in unison with other players. So we're creating this culture of excellence among them, but they're not comparing their climb to the other players. They're just realizing that they're in this together.
Yeah, and actually, just talk about language just got me thinking, because this crops up a lot, and everybody says, oh, is it good to have an early developer? Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And actually, I don't think it matters whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but actually our language around it is really important, because it is a bad thing if, as you say, the physically dominant 10-year-old who ruins everybody else's game and scores 10 goals every weekend, and all we ever talk about, going back to the piece of, oh, well, you were amazing, weren't you an amazing goal scorer, lavishing all this praise, all this glory, all this stuff all over social media. And you and I both know that the best 10-year-olds don't make the best 13-year-olds, the best 13-year-olds don't make the best 16-year-olds. What is the long-term impact on that child where they get to the stage where everybody is starting to develop? They're no longer scoring every week as much as they were. It is far more difficult. They're not getting all the praise and kudos for the scoring. Actually, we know a lot of teenagers then at that point are like, do you know what, this is just a bit too tough for me, because I'll go and do something else. So actually, I don't think it's a bad thing if we've got an early developer, but we've also got to be very careful of our language around both an early developer and a late developer.
Very much so. So there are two interesting stories there. One, I know you have it. I think it's is it Great Britain Idol or British Idol? We have American Idol. Yeah. And there's the American Idol syndrome. How many times have we used to watch the prelims, where they're all in front of the team and they're singing in conference centers, and those are the people that are picked to then go on to American Idol. And there's always that one person who gets up and sings, and it's not very good. And then one of them usually says, you're not that great a singer. And they start crying, and they're like, but my mom always said I was a great singer, or everybody's always told me I'm a great singer. They may have been an early developer, and then, I don't know, puberty hit and their voice cracked or whatever, but nobody ever used language that kept them on the path of development. They're just like, well, I'm a great singer, so I don't need to practice it. I don't need a voice coach. I don't need this. And so then they appear in front of American Idol and they have this meltdown, and people are like, how can a 20-something melt down on national television? Because of, like you said, the early bloomer conversations. Nobody was ever having conversations around work ethic and training and growth and all of that. They're just, oh, you're great, you're dominant, you're this. And then one day they're not. And it's like the fixed mindset concept. I've lost it. I was really good, and where'd my goal scoring ability go? It was just here. Same thing with those young ones. I had a player who probably one of the best players I ever coached. And he was the most dominant player on the field from an intellectual and leadership perspective. But we had a goal scorer on our team who was absolutely phenomenal. The kid would score 3 or 4 goals a game. And this kid was amazing. He would steal the ball off the keeper's foot. He would steal back passes. He would breakaways, volleys, you name it. He scored from anywhere at will. And he left our team because his dad got relocated to Europe. And so his job took him to Europe, and he leaves our team. And so for the next season, and this was a team, I'm talking like, we were just pouring through other teams at a young age. They were 11 years old. And my dominant player, my really good one, says to me, next season's going to be really tough. And I said, why? He said, well, our goal score's gone. I said, all of you have been scoring goals. We've created a really good team. We're not relying on one player. And he says, yeah, but my job was always to get the ball to so-and-so. And I said, well, wait, that was never your job. Your job was, and I gave him a different role. And I said, this is what you were there for. It just so happened he tended to be the beneficiary, but You can score as many goals as him. You were always in a position to score. You just chose to let him be the one score the goal. So this year, your job is to step up and choose to somebody else or yourself. Well, he went on that season to be our best goal scorer because he suddenly realized, I've always had the power. It was never him. I was the one creating the opportunities. Could have been a disastrous moment where could have said, yeah, it's going to be a tough season without him. I mean, what are we going to do without our goal scorer? And that kid would have never come out of his shell.
Yeah. Yeah. The language one, the more you look at it, the more you realize just how vital it is. And I was talking to Larissa Mills on the Parents in Sport podcast. We've just recorded an episode and we were talking about the damage of overuse of devices and children not being able to communicate very well and the art of language being lost. And one thing that has been sad that I found a really difficult conversation with a lot of parents I've had is that in sport, even as parents, we can often say, oh, just keep going, because if you keep working hard, you'll get there one day, which the message itself is a really positive message. Every parent would do it because that's saying that you've got to work to achieve something. But we're now seeing young athletes, elite youth performers who have done absolutely everything that was asked of them by coaches, everything that was asked of them of parents, couldn't have worked any harder, and they still haven't achieved what they wanted to achieve, or they still haven't got there. And of course, now they're lashing out at everybody around them, including the parents, because they're then saying, well, you told me that if I just kept doing it and I gave up everything that I would get there. And actually, the fundamentals of the message are right. But in sport, we have absolutely no guaranteed formula of how we get there. And again, just talking about language today, that story just sort of popped back into my mind.
Yeah. And so I'm working on a course that I'm getting ready to put up called the Spartan Brain. And I talk about 7 values that really help drive success. And in one section, there is a caveat where I start digging into the idea of the growth mindset. And if you put your effort into it and you're resilient and bounce back, and like you just said, you give it everything you have, you'll accomplish anything's accomplishable, right? And there's a caveat. It requires scaffolding. It requires a little bit of luck, which is when preparation meets opportunity. It requires a little lightning in a bottle. And the key is if we're going to tell people, listen, you put all your hard work into this and you have a strong work ethic and you give it everything you've got, you're going to achieve X. We've got to scaffold that with actual resources and tools. So it's the idea that if I decide that I want to learn a second language, I'm not just going to work really hard and learn it. I've got to find the tools that help me learn it. I've got to find a tutor, or I've got to find the app, so that's the key is we can use that positivity, but we've got to back it up with scaffolding the learning process with the right tools. And we still have to give that warning that, sometimes it's not in the cards. That's my son. And there's not, like you said, there's not a formula. My son said to me that, in his one class, he's doing writing and it's AP language. And he's the only one in his class that scored a 6, which is the highest you can get in AP for rhetorical analysis. And he said, everybody in class thinks I'm dumb because I'm not doing X. I'm not doing well in the class. I lift weights. I'm an athlete. So they think I'm a dumb jock. And the teacher said, well, he's the only one that's gotten 6s on that. And somebody said, how? You don't even follow the formula. You don't write like the rest of us. And the teacher said, yeah, it's really strange. You don't really typically follow the right writing formula, and that you tend to get the right rhetorical analysis and do very well. And I said, son, there's a caveat. Everybody says there's a pathway and we must all follow the same pathway. And if we do that, we'll get there. And for a long time, we all followed the belief that nobody could run a 4-minute mile because nobody had done it. And so they said, oh, it's physically impossible. No matter what formulas you follow, we're just never going to run a sub 4-minute mile. It's just not humanly possible. And then a guy by the name of Roger Bannister said, well, the way you're doing it, maybe, but I'm going to try it differently. And he somehow ran a 4-minute mile. And I said, son, how many people have run the sub 4-minute mile since Roger? And he goes, tons. And I said, exactly. So you could either follow the path everybody is following and maybe not get there, or if you're having success with the path that you're using and you're putting resources into that, maybe you're carving a new path like Roger Bannister for other people to follow you. Like the prescribed path isn't for everybody. You've got to take your path. And if it's working for you, continue to use that path until it doesn't. But don't think because nobody's done that path before that you can't. You might be the barrier breaker for a different way to write.
Yeah, we've just done some work with the Football Association over here, and we were privileged to be part of the presentation that was launched about the change in all the girls pathway. We sort of hosted the presentation and asked questions to the Football Association because it was for parents and carers, and we tried to make it really chatty like we do with this podcast. But interestingly, out and about talking to parents, I'm aware of quite a good group of young girl players. And they've done really well because at the moment they've followed a certain path. The moment that then suddenly the grass may be greener on the other side or there may be another way, you've then got a lot of parents who are thinking, oh, well, I might change it. And I said to Chris, what are you changing it for? I said it's working, and it's working whether or not that's the path anyway. And I think that around sports parents, I think there's always that doubt of, am I doing the right thing? What is somebody else doing? Is there the right path? That must be the right path. And an example over here in girls football is, we know that a lot of girls can really develop by playing with the boys for as long as possible. And actually, they may be better off playing with and against boys than being in the very top all girls teams playing girls every week, because the playing pool at the moment is stronger. Trying to explain that to people and for people to understand it and feel comfortable with it is a whole other challenge, as you can imagine.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's a whole, so you see it all the time in club sports, right? The whole path, the grass is greener on the other side. And I remember people teasing me that my players were going to be poached from my teams. I said, listen, if they choose to leave me, then it wasn't meant to be. Like, I get it. If they are not getting what they need out of me, that's fine. But, I'm not going to keep my players here because I if that's where they want to be. But to be honest with you, you got to really weigh all the options and decide if changing the path at this point in time is the right idea, especially if it's working.
Yeah.
And it's, that's the same thing. Like my son, I told my son, I said, why would you listen to a fellow student who says, well, you don't write the way I do? They're not the one getting a 6 on the AP. Their path may not be working as well. So keep your path. And if you switch to their path, you may stop getting those because that's not the path you were supposed to be on. So yeah, we want the best for our kids. We want so badly for our children to not suffer the pains we suffered, to not have the setbacks we've had, to have success and joy and happiness in their life, that sometimes we want to mow that path down. We want to pave it and make it perfect for them. But our job is not, it's not to prepare the path for the kid. And I don't remember who said it, but it's not to prepare the path for the children. It's to prepare the children for the path. That's our job. My job is to protect my child and to make sure he's ready for the journey. And if he's on a particular path, I'm going to keep him on that path and give him the tools and resources to succeed on that path. I'm not going to pull him off of it and put him on another one because I think it's a clearer path when that may not be his path. If I did that, neither of my children would have played volleyball. My one son was a kicker for the football team, varsity kicker, first year out. It's like, oh my gosh, because he said, I just want to play football because it's a sport I never played. I quit football at like 13, American football at like 13. If I had forced my boys to play soccer because that was the path I took, they wouldn't have had these cool experiences. And then I would have missed out on seeing them blossom in their own way,
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're talking a lot about, words, things we say, perceptions, language, which is obviously what we're talking about today. But it isn't just what we say, but it's also sometimes what we don't say in our body language. So as sports parents, let's just have a little look at that part of the jigsaw as well. Some of the things we don't say or do, and just how we're reacting with perhaps the way we stand when we're watching, or to how we, sit in the car or use the gear stick inappropriately on the way home. Any thoughts on body language?
Yes. So if you look at really the language of excellence, it's not just the words, it's facial expressions, it's body language, it's values, what we value, things we talk about, like you just said. And yeah, as parents, sometimes a pause can be the most powerful thing we can do. When our child, for instance, when a child is hitting a moment of adversity, we want to jump right in, swoop in and fix it for them right away. But the best thing we can do is teach them to be independent problem solvers and solve the problem themselves, because then they can do it when we're not there to help them. So there's that moment where something happens, and instead of jumping in right away, you pause. You don't say anything. You wait to see how they react and see what they do. Kids will give a very clear look when they need you. Otherwise, they may just have a look of, I need to solve this. I need to figure this out. They may look at you for validation, give them a thumbs up, but let them solve it. In the car rides and then on the, or even just on the sidelines, when your child makes a mistake, if they look over and you're going like this or like that, they read that. And so you didn't have to say a word. Your child just went, oh, I failed. And now my dad's disappointed in me. So like I said, I honestly probably never had to ask my son, did you score? All I had to say was, how'd the game go? We lost 3-0. And I go, great. And then he immediately reads into it. Oh, I didn't score and we lost. So my dad's disappointed in me. So yeah, the body language, the facial expression's huge. And in games, I had a parent that every game he would sit with headphones in, and he did it so that he didn't have to listen to whatever else was going on the sidelines. And so he wasn't engaging in the game as much, so he could become a spectator. He said, I felt more like a spectator than I did a parent watching my kid. But his big thing was a thumbs up. His kid would mess up and he'd be like, it's all right, keep going. Or his kid would do something great and he'd be like, all right, well done, buddy, well done. And so it was the same physical movement every time. And so what it did is it just allowed the kid to be very independent. The kid was no longer seeking validation from his dad because he knew he was getting a thumbs up regardless of what happened. And so what he started to figure out was, when I've messed up, my dad knows I've messed up. I know I've messed up. How can I solve it? And when I've done something well, I've got to get used to being my own biggest fan and be like, great job, Reed. You did a good job. I got to stop looking here or here to the sidelines for that validation and find it within. And it was all from a simple body language, movement. So the language, even though there are words that we typically cause the brain process, these movements and facial expressions are just as important. And like you said, in the car ride home, especially, no matter how bad that game was, no matter how difficult a day it was, if you take that into the car, my wife used to say this all the time with my road rage, nobody outside the car can hear you, but we're all trapped in here with this, whatever this is. And the energy, she said, you didn't even need to say a word. The energy just oozes off you and it fills the car with this fog. And your kids are sitting in the back seat, choking in this fog of anger and frustration and whatever else. And it's confusing to them, especially if you don't say anything. So the big thing is, shake it off before you get in the car. Just blow it out. Rough day, whatever it is. I'm going to get in the car. And my first question is, are we going for pizza or dogs? Are we going for ice cream? Are we going, like, just if they see you model the behavior of, I'm moving on from today, this is not going to affect me past the field, then they pick up on that and they don't beat themselves up over it.
Yeah, and look, I'm not going to lie. I think it's a constant battle for most parents, and I think being self-aware about it, some of the things we've talked about, I've had my huge challenges, car journeys home, over the years with my own kids. My oldest son now, who's 13, and he's brilliant because I've got to the stage now, if I'm really grumpy and upset by something, I get in the car and I do all the wrong things. I just sit in silence. And I sort of put it in and I start driving, and he's brilliant. He sits next to me, and about 5 minutes into the journey, he leans across and he goes, are you okay? And he knows full well I'm not okay. He knows absolutely that, no, I'm clearly not. And I've got an awful lot I want to say about a variety of things. But it's just so brilliant because not even him doing that just makes me smile and make me realise, what on earth are you doing? You really need to have a think about this. But we've had years of trying to work about how we're going to do car journeys home, and it's still a work in progress.
Oh yeah, what a brilliant young man. See, that's great parenting, because he's there, because he knows he can have those frank conversations with you, and he's I stumbled on this accidentally. I was coaching a group of, and I'm telling the story because I want people to know it's every age. Kids are like this at every age. They're very perceptive and they are much more sophisticated than we give them credit for. And if you've ever watched a 3 or 4-year-old try to manipulate you into something, you see how perceptive and sophisticated children are. Somehow they ended up with that cookie, even though you were not going to let them have that cookie. So I'm working with a group of 8-year-old girls, and I had a really, really just a day. And I show up at practice, and I called my wife, I think, or whatever before. And I'm like, I can't do this practice. I'm going to break down in tears. I'm going to be an angry person. These kids are going to feel everything coming off of me because I wear my emotions on my sleeves. And I don't know if it was my wife. My wife may have told me that or whatever, but the decision was, I'm just going to be honest with these girls. They're 8. I know they're young, but I'm just going to tell. They're 7, 8. I'm going to tell them. So I get out of the car, I go to the field, and I try to lock the monkeys in the trunk. I call them, you get these monkeys on your back that are picking at you, and I try to throw them in the trunk and lock it. Like, you're going to stay in there and not affect how my day goes. But I couldn't. They were mad. It was a bad day. So I say to the girls, I'm like, look, Coach Reed's having a really rough. I'm having a really rough day, and so I'm sorry if I come off as different today, and I'm sorry if I seem mad or upset. It's not you. I want you to know that it's me. Adults have bad days too. And one of the little girls reaches out and puts her hand on my shoulder and goes, it's okay, Coach. We have bad days and it's okay. And I'm like your son, I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, it's okay for me to say that to my child. So really, you could even do that. You could get in the car and be like, I'm struggling with what happened to that game, just personally, nothing to do with you or the team. I might need a moment. And your kid might actually show some empathy or figure out from you that it's perfectly okay to say that I'm not doing well in this moment. And what a lesson for our children. What a lesson for a young athlete to already be able to look at an adult and say, I'm having a tough go. I mean, in New Zealand, All Blacks do it. They have a rule. They have therapists on staff, not just sports psychologists and performance experts, but therapists. And they did at one point. And if a New Zealand All Black was having a rough day, if one of the rugby players with a big 240-pound beast was having a day, they could go to coach and say, I'm having a day. I need to talk to somebody. Well, if they can do it, the elite athletes, imagine what we could do for our children from a mental health perspective. If, like you, we gave them that space to be emotional beings and live in those moments and tell us they're having those moments.
Yeah, and that's where we've got to, I guess, dispel things like these myths of resilience, that it's a sign of weakness to say that it's a struggle, or it's a sign of weakness to have our challenges. And actually, no, it isn't. That definitely isn't what resilience is. That's an old-fashioned, out of date term now. And actually, people who are able to talk, are able to seek support when they need it, far healthier human beings, far healthier sports people, because you realize that you're doing it with other people. You're not doing it all alone, which we know isn't great for humans anyway, trying to do everything in isolation.
Yeah, you've heard the David Goggins and the Jocko Willings and some of the other former special forces that have created great programs for people from resilience. And you hear them talk about the concept embrace the suck. And that is exactly what it is there are times in our lives where we are in moments that just really suck. And even operators, even special forces know that it's okay to feel that way, and that your teammates are the ones that are like, work the problem or embrace the suck. Or I call it with, my kids I work with, you're stuck in the suck. Sometimes resilience is knowing that this is just a rough moment and I'm not doing well in this moment, but it's okay. It's okay to feel that way. And so I'm either going to solve it and get around it. I'm going to innovate a way to solve it. I'm going to back away and say, this isn't the path I need to be on. There's so much adversity in this moment that maybe I'm not on the right path. Or, resilience is sometimes sitting in that moment saying, I'm stuck in the suck, but I'm going to be a stronger person on the other side. And I've got the support of the people around me.
Yeah. I mean, look, as I knew we would, we have disappeared down a number of rabbit holes in this episode. We've gone off on diversions. The script that I shared with you has been a complete work of fiction, which I will share.
My apologies.
Which I will openly admit, including my questions. So I think we're doing pretty well here, that we haven't stumbled over any of our words. But to wrap up this and everything we've covered, what are your top couple of tips for parents to go away with, to think about, and then probably even better, just a couple of things that they can maybe do at the weekend, something that they can try immediately?
Oh, top couple of tips. Maybe it's mistakes I've made that we've learned from. One is that our voice becomes theirs, especially as an influencer, a parent, a coach, somebody that's got a high level of influence over the children around us. Our voice becomes theirs. So the things that we say and do to them and around them will become their internal dialogue. And so keep in mind that every word you use, they're internalizing. And so when you're not there, that's what's echoing. So what words are you using that leave these positive marks on them when you're not around? Another one is that it is okay to be verbal with your children. Like, that's the one mistake I made as a dad, is I thought I was supposed to be stoic and non-verbal and non-emotional. But it's okay. Like you said, to have your son reach over and say, "Are you okay?" shows that he was comfortable with being verbal with you in ways that typically we don't see modeled in TV and movies and stuff like that. It's okay to talk to your children and be frank. It's okay to be emotional and have these very frank conversations, because you're building great brains in young children when you teach them at an early age to be verbal with their emotions and explain them. I'm feeling this way. That is huge when we can name our emotions. And then for me, one thing that I've really been falling on lately, because of just, especially in the US, with a lot of the divisive rhetoric that we have happening these days, that if you speak loudly, people will hear you. We see that. If you speak knowledgeably, people will listen. But if you speak lovingly, they will follow. So if you want your children to follow you, to go the path that you think might be best for them, or if you just want your children to really believe in you and trust you, speak lovingly. That's as a coach, as a parent, as a leader in general. Kind and firm, loving, gentle leaders get a lot more out of the people around them, because they follow. They don't just listen and they don't just hear, they follow. And so I guess the big tip to take away this weekend is find those moments where we can actually say something loving to our kids. We tend to find those moments where they're doing something wrong, or we think we can fix them, or we think we can help them. And that's what we do. Even as teachers and coaches, we're always looking for the mistakes. But be a reward hunter. Find those moments this weekend where you can say to your child, "Good for you in the way you handled that. Good for you for shaking that person's hand and looking them in the eyes," or "Good on you for hitting a tough moment in the game and resetting and not getting upset." Like, find those little moments where you can reward them for the growth that they've made as a person.
I knew this episode wasn't going to disappoint. I already can't wait to play it back and have a listen. Reed, absolute pleasure to have you on the Parents in Sport podcast. We were going to make sure that your book and all the details and everything that you need will be on this episode, and all the show notes and all the marketing that goes with it. Thank you for giving up your time, and I'd love to have another conversation again, very much like this, sometime soon.
Gordon, it's always a treat talking to you. This was such a treat to be on the show, and this was well worth my time to have this great conversation.
Thank you for listening. Check us out at parentsinsport.co.uk.